Good morning. I am Sarah Hawkins from Min Writes, Min Reads. Denise, Rand, and I are connected through the Indie Author Project world. And in fact, we last saw each other at the Public Library Association conference in Nashville in early March, right before COVID-19 changed our world. The Indie Author Project is a series of regional author projects across the country, recognizing the best indie authors from within various states and or regions, and winners from state and regional contests go on to compete for the national award winner. So why are we here today? After George Floyd's murder, and for me personally, being down at the protest and the healing sites here in Minneapolis, Denise and I connected to talk about what we could do within the Indie Author Project realm to continue to grow and to continue to further discussions. So we thank you for being with us here today on this journey together of continued learning. Rand will be sharing his story and his personal perspective on some tough topics. Denise Raleigh is from the soon-to-be famous Illinois Author Project, and Rand Walker is the 2019 Indie Author of the Year. So without further ado, thank you for being part of a candid discussion, race and writing with Rand Walker, and I will turn it over to Denise.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Rand, and everyone who's out there watching this. And indeed, she told our story. I first met Rand Walker in 2019. He was our very first national winner. And we met in Chicago at a ceremony with Biblioboard, and it was a fantastic time to meet him. And every time I have talked with him in getting ready for this and other like PLA events, it's been a fantastic journey for me. We are so lucky to have him be our very first national winner. And he won it for the novel Daykeeper. And so let's get right into it. He has a varied background. He's lived in many places. He's undertaken a number of professions. So Rand, could you talk to us a little bit and let us know how you grew up and how you became Rand Walker, award-winning author?
All right. I grew up, and first of all, thank you, Denise, for having me. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really do appreciate this. I grew up in West Point, Mississippi, small town. It might be larger now, but when I was there, population roughly 15, 16,000 people. That includes the cats and the dogs as well. And it was an interesting place to grow up in. You don't really understand exactly where you're growing up affects how you think about things, how you see the world. For example, we had multiple of everything when it came to homecoming queens and smartest in the grade and all of that. There was always a black and a white everything. And, I knew that when I got old enough, I was going to probably go to college somewhere out of state. I ended up going to Morehouse in Atlanta. Morehouse is an all male, historically black college. Also the school that Martin Luther King Jr., Spike Lee, all those guys attended. And then I left there, ended up going to New York and working in publishing, went to law school in DC, practiced law in Mississippi, got fortunate enough to get a job teaching in Tennessee, and then I was brought to Hampton, Virginia, which is where I've been for the last 12 years. Very happy to be there.
Yeah. And with that varied of a background, Rand, can you tell me how the many experiences that you've had growing up in Mississippi, I think you were publishing hip hop magazines, sometimes in New York. How did that shape you as a person and as a writer?
Well, there's a story pretty much everywhere you go. Everything you do contributes to a narrative. Kind of think about your life as a book, and these are just chapters within the book. I think growing up in Mississippi, I never really expected that I would actually be in New York. And I was working at some hip hop magazines. I wasn't the publisher. But I didn't expect to experience a lot of the things I experienced. So I just feel fortunate that I guess the route of my life has gone through the places it's gone through.
And so becoming a writer, and I assume maybe I'd like you to talk about your journey as a writer, like when it started. When did you start writing? And then how did, who are the writers that most influenced you?
Okay. Just like most people who are writers, you start writing when you're a kid, making up books and hand them to your parents saying, hey, I just made a book. I won an award when I was in grade school and everything, but I didn't get serious about writing until I moved back from New York and DC to Mississippi, and went through a few things that were, some challenging episodes of my life, and had to figure out what it was I really wanted to do. And writing was just a thing that kept coming back to me. So I began to work on a novel. And I was inspired by the fact that Mississippi has a number of well-known, internationally known writers like William Faulkner, Eudora Welty, Richard Wright, Tennessee Williams. And I just kind of like drew off of that energy of Mississippi being a place. And even today it's still like that. You have KSA Lehman, a lot of guys and women from Mississippi who are really doing very well, as far as Angie Thomas in Jackson, Mississippi. So it's always just been a haven for that. And I guess being a part of that energy was always something that kind of helped me to write. But, just like Mississippi can give you that positive energy, it can also challenge you in a lot of ways. And I think those challenges are probably the thing that is most pertinent to the candid discussion that we're having today.
Yeah, and please talk about that. That's what we're talking about. We're going to be as transparent as we can. And you are a writer who is Black.
Yes.
And as Sarah and I talked about, we're two non-Black people. We work with writers, we support writers, but, what we all need to learn together is, where do we go from here to improve on things? And so, please tell me what your experience is as a writer who is Black. How has that been? And please share some of the candid things that you've shared leading up to this, please.
Okay. Well, I'm a Black man who is a writer, first and foremost. And I use the term Black primarily for me because I believe it's a very strong word. It also is a unifying term that captures all of the people of descendants of Africa that are across the diaspora. African-American, I don't, mind being called African-American, but if you're going to tell me what I call myself, I think myself as a Black man who happens to be a writer. So some of the experiences that I had growing up, well, I'll say it like this. I feel like what I went through, a lot of people just didn't even know there was that kind of world. Let me give you an example. My hometown, it was not uncommon for, a white group of teenage boys to drive by in a pickup truck and yell the N-word out at you. It's almost like a game, like, oh, we are done trying to hunt snipes, so we're going to go and harass Black people. And it didn't happen all the time, but if you were in the wrong place, it was not uncommon for somebody to do that. And it's not just what happened to me. Like, my father had to deal with the same thing. You'd be walking down a country road and then pickup truck comes down with a bunch of white boys on the back. They see you. They turn around in the road to come back. You run out into the fields to try to hide, grab a stick, something to protect yourself. And then going back a generation before that, I have stories about, my grandfather having to deal with the same thing. And I imagine it probably goes all the way back to, at some point when, my ancestors actually got here. So, it's this whole thing of dealing with active racism growing up and it just being a part of your existence. You learn how to survive, navigate, and thrive in spite of those things. And then you move up north and you're like, okay, I'm safe from that. But the difference between the North and South, and I think that's the reason why a lot of Black people who are from the South can tolerate it better in the South, is because it's wide out, it's out and open. No one's trying to hide it. Yeah, that's a Confederate flag on the back of his pickup truck. Yeah, this, you know what it is. But when you get a little farther up past the Mason-Dixon line, a lot of times people will conceal their hatred and express it in ways that are not so obvious or clear. So,
Ah, so you're writing. You're a super, just extremely talented writer. How?
thank you.
Again, I just finished Race of Races, and we were talking a little bit how much, and one of your characters in that book also tells her son that he has to read a Toni Morrison book.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about Toni Morrison and her writings, and how that's impacted you.
Toni Morrison, and there are a number of writers that fall into that brotherhood, sisterhood. But Toni Morrison was one of the writers who could just tell you, I don't feel like I have to write to a white audience. Because there's always this expectation that when Black people are writing their characters, that they have to juxtapose them against whiteness, whether it's in the form of slavery, whether it's in the form of civil rights. The thing is, white people want to see themselves in the story, even if they don't really like the way they're portrayed. I don't really get all of that because that's not really my perspective. But Toni was like, if I want to write a story and there are no white people in the story, there's nothing that says that story is not valid. And even as far as how she chose to bring certain meaning and symbolism to her story that were different from what would have been in the Western canon of literature. Like if water was life to some white writer, water to Toni Morrison might represent the space that represents the Middle Passage and Africans who never made it to the Americas, who were tossed off their ships. You see this in Beloved with the daughter rising out of the water. And she feels like she doesn't have to explain it to anybody. I'm going to write it. You're going to get it, or you're not going to get it, or you do the research to make it happen. And I find that extremely empowering. Just being able to focus on writing your story and not trying to write with the gaze of whiteness over your shoulder. Like, do they get it? Have I written it so they can understand it? So yeah, it's a fascinating take on things. And I really do value her contributions and her work as a result. And with regard to that book, The Race of Races, I love Song of Solomon. And I had a feeling that would play a role in the plot of the book. And it actually does. So I would say if a person reads The Race of Races, it would be helpful if they read Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. But if they didn't, they would still kind of get what's going on and be able to appreciate it to some extent.
So how does race, again, I thought it was threaded throughout the story of Race of Races, but how, and you are you have, what is it, 18 or 19 books now? How does
Actually,
race...
it's 22.
Oh gosh, I'm behind.
No,
I'm sorry.
it's cool,
I'm sorry.
it's cool.
Okay. But how does it impact your writing ongoing? And I know maybe you could talk a little bit about that. You do some micro stories as well as long form. And
Right.
How does race play in your writing?
All right. So sometimes I don't actively think about it. And this is funny because I'll write a story. I won't have any ethnic signifiers or anything. And to me, the character's Black. But a person who doesn't know me and they see my name is Rand Walker, they don't know if I'm Black or white or whatever. They'll read the story. And in their mind, the character's white. In fact, there are some readers who will get upset if you don't tell them that the character's Black. Don't trick me. Like the default is always whiteness. And actually, I started to play around with some of these ideas in the microfiction, because with microfiction, you're not really hemmed into a particular genre. You can write whatever you want to write about whatever you want to do. And in one of my stories in the collection Strange Museum, it actually checks the reader with regard to how they automatically default to a certain assumption about race. Like I was remembering reading, works by Stephen King or John Grisham. I like John Grisham a lot, but you will know who the black characters are because they tell you up front this person's black. Now you have writers like Zadie Smith who might kind of like bait you around and trick you a little bit with that. But I think that we kind of need to open our minds to it. The fact that the characters may not be who you think they are. And that's why I think Hollywood gets so pissed off about these films that they do. Can you make this character white? Does this character have to be black? And a lot of black screenwriters can relate to that. But when you're reading a novel, you don't really have to have that discussion because the cinema is going on up here. But then, again, the default tends to be the white person in your head. So,
yeah. So, because in Race of Races, your first politician, he is having an extramarital affair, and you don't realize until we're several pages into it till we realize it's a black woman that,
yes.
And so that's. Was that intentional, or did you want to wait for a while before you let the reader know the race of the other affair person?
Well, I think that the race was only important as far as it affected the plot. I mean, because I knew that people would automatically assume that the first character was white. That's, again, that default whiteness there. And so when I introduced the woman he was having an affair with, I just described her in the way I described the previous characters. Now, if you're a person who's black, you would have picked up on immediately that she was black. Like the first sentence, the description, you're like, oh, she's black. But if you're not black, you're looking at it, you're still trying to find a way to keep her white until, it's explicitly stated. So, I never really thought a lot about people not knowing the race of the character to that point, but it makes sense, and it kind of underscores what I was just saying about the default.
So your default is to just write the story that comes out,
right.
And if you reveal the race as it's appropriate or not, but you don't go into a storyboarding, and I don't know whether you storyboard or outline as you do this, but the race of the character may or may not be important to your storyline.
Well, I guess to me, I write out of my experience as a black man. So if you look at most of my books, the characters are black. I mean, to me, they're black. In situations where they're white, I try to write it in a way where it's clear that that's what it is. But going into the story, I'm not trying to avoid discussing blackness. In fact, I wrote a book called White Pages that addresses this entire thing. It's the black writer who ends up writing under a pseudonym, pretending to be an old white man using the J.D. Salinger mythology, and he's a young black man, and because he feels it will help him get published. And that's a critique of the publishing industry in general, but I'm not going to get into that just yet. But yeah, I don't really think about race actively, but it's going to be, my culture will appear in the book by default. And my culture is that of a black American. So, I know it's kind of difficult to distinguish between the two, but, the work is black because I'm black, even if the characters are white. Charles Chestnut, one of my favorite short story writers, he wrote a story called Baxter's Procrustes. Every single person in the story was white. In fact, a lot of people thought that he was white because he wrote the story. If you knew the story behind it, you'd understand exactly why those people need to be white in the story. But yeah, I'm just going to write the story from my experience, and my experience is going to be tempered by the fact that I'm a black American. So it's not like I'm actively seeking to put race into the story.
So let's segue a little bit into the publishing industry and black writers. Can you just expand on that a little?
Okay. Something recently happened on Twitter, which was really cool. They had the hashtag publish and pay me. It was a black woman who came up with the hashtag. And this happened during the protests. So a lot of people wanted to be helpful and contribute to the discussion and try to find a way to navigate a path of healing through all of this. So a number of white authors came aboard and began to report their advances. And, we knew in our gut what the situation was, but now we had receipts. your favorite African-American or Black writer, like N.K. Jemisin, for example. She's winning the highest awards in science fiction back to back to back for her books. And her advances were not even scratching the surface of some white woman with a literary novel that got an advance of $2 million and didn't come close to earning out of her advance. And you start to see a kind of pattern happening there. And it's frustrating, but it's kind of a byproduct of a larger systemic problem with traditional publishing. Just not a lot of Black people in there. I mean, I can get into that if you'd like, or I can, because it's kind of a third rail. I do hope to one day work more with traditional publishing, so I don't want to overplay my hand here, but there's not a lot of Black people who work in publishing. And then there are a number of publishers who continue, even in 2020, to use the argument that they don't really know how to market to Black people. It's not really a science fiction book, it's a Black book. And we don't really know that as well, so we're going to hedge our bets a little bit with how much we invest in the project. So it's on one level, it's complicated. On the other level, it's very simple. And, it's just depending on who you talk to as to what answer you're going to get on that.
And you being our first national winner as an indie author, does indie offer a different venue for people who are looking for a little bit more of a level playing field?
Well, I don't know if level playing field is what you're going to get, because you have to deal with the readers. And, Black people will read Black people. They will read white people. They will read Asian. They will read African. We read everything. But you have white readers who don't read as widely. So it's, even if you're indie, you're still not going to have access to the same number of readers, because people are looking for ways, well, maybe not looking actively, but they're not actively looking to read your work. And so that does have an impact. But it also means, if you're independent, that you can write what you want to write, do it how you want to do it, get the cover that you want. If you're a writer from Nigeria and your book is coming out through a major publisher, they're going to put that sun and that tree on the cover, which is on just about every other book. But if you're doing it yourself, you're like, this image does not represent the story I have in mind. I have something more specific, more texture, something that is, more reflective of what I had in mind when I wrote the book. And I love having that kind of control over my covers and over the content, the way it's laid out, the way it's edited. I love that. But at the same time, who wouldn't like to grow their audience? And that's where I think traditional publishing has a little bit of an upper hand there.
Okay. With 22 books, so prolific. You're an industrious writer who gets it done. You must have very good writing habits. Can you just talk a little bit about your workflow, and what inspires you, and when, how does the writing process work for you? How you've been very successful. So, please expand on that.
That's an interesting one, because I feel like I don't really have a set pattern for writing. There was a time when I first started where I was writing my books late at night. And then there was a time when I only wrote my books during November, during NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. And now I write primarily microfiction, so I don't have to think about it. I can just say, I have an idea for something, and just start writing it down, get it down. I'll edit it and fix it later, but just get it down. But I write whenever, and I hate to say this because there are a lot of people out there, and I've given this advice before. If you're going to be a writer, you have to put your behind in the chair, do the writing. But when you're a poet, you don't really have to put your behind in the chair. You can put your back against the tree and wait. And when you're writing microfiction, it does have a lot of similarities to prose poetry. And so you can allow a certain amount of muse, inspired stuff to come along for you to actually start to write. Interestingly, though, I didn't expect to do any writing during the COVID lockdown. I got to a point where I was just like, I don't even know the next time I'm going to a bookstore. I'm working from home. I don't know, my daughter's going back to school. And you get really inside of your own head. And my wife just kept saying, you got to write. You're going to find your way out of this. Just find something. All you need is just a little bit of something. Just follow that. And, originally I started my writing career doing what I call neo-soul romantic comedy type of books in the vein of Black movies like Love and Basketball, Brown Sugar, things like that. And I was like, well, what would that look like if I were to write it using the microfiction style that I've been working on over the past year? And that's what I did. I wrote a book like that. And then once I got that going, I got ideas about 100 other things and started writing different books from there. And to date, as of today, I've written 5 books since since February, excuse me. And it's just going and going and going. But then again, I write a different thing than other people write. So if a person's writing a novel, I can see where they can wrestle with it. But another thing, and this is somewhat tangential, but still on point, I think that we have, especially with literary publishing, played up the whole, it took me 10 years to write this book. Whether it's Junot Diaz, or whether it's, I can name any number of people who claim that, Ernest Hemingway talking about, oh, it took me 60 something years to write The Old Man in the Sea when it was really like 3 weeks. And I think there's this mythology that we have to live up to. And I understand that you're getting experience the entire time. You can incorporate that experience into any book that you're writing. So if I wrote a book today, I could say it took me 25 years to write it. But I think we've gotten to the point where we reward people for having these books or ideas that have stretched out over a long period of time. And like Donna Tartt, she takes 10 years in between books. And there are people who are like, yes, it must be good if she took 10 years to write it. And I'm like, yeah, it might be good. That's a really subjective thing. But, you have to do your thing. But I think we need to stop, giving people permission to just take the entire life to write one book. Stephen King said it best known writing. He's like, if you're a writer and you're not writing, then what are you doing? Teaching Sunday school classes. And that's not a diss. That's just to say that, you're clearly not doing the writing. So.
Yeah. So let's move into that. So I want to ask you a 2-part question. So what would your advice be to young Black people who are writers? And would it be any different than your advice to just young writers in general?
It would have to be different, because there's a truth that they would understand about the way the world works. And I can speak directly to something. They have an antenna already set up for that. I can speak directly to that frequency. I would have to adjust the frequency, neutralize it a little bit from speaking to a broader group. But with regards to Black writers, right now there's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of energy, good and bad. Some people can be compelled to write in the moment. And if you're a poet, you have to write in the moment. You have to let that energy pass through you and onto the page. If you're a person who's writing fiction, it's been my perspective that sometimes it's best to kind of let a little distance develop between you and the subject matter so you can have a broader perspective on it. With fiction, you have to write characters. You have to have characters that you understand. And because you have to have conflict, it's a matter of fiction. That means that you have to understand both of the individuals before the conflict occurs. And to do that, sometimes you have to step outside of yourself. Like, why would a person think this? Like, I see this all the time. People do things that just completely baffle me. And I'm like, why would this person go into this place during the COVID outbreaks that we have with no mask on and no social distancing whatsoever and talk loudly in someone else's face? That doesn't make sense to me. But then again, if I'm going to write that story, I have to be able to at least make the character believable. And for me to believe the character and for the motivation to be authentic, I have to put myself in their mind. They're thinking, this is the information that they've received. These are the feelings that they have. This is the privilege that they have enjoyed. Just take that, put it all together and say, okay, so I want to portray this realistically and respectfully, because you have to have the conflict. I can't just mask those characters. And a lot of times you don't get that perspective until you step back. And it's still hard when you step back because some things still continue to baffle me. But if I'm going to write about it, and I admire writers who have tackled subjects like that, there are a number of writers who have done fictionalized versions of Emmett Till's story. And they had to go there, be there, make sense of that in their head some kind of way just to be able to put it on the page. And it takes effort, it takes practice, it takes training. But just know, if you're a Black writer and that's what you're trying to do right now, you're not alone. There are people out there who've done it before you came along. You just have to persevere, but take your time with it. Make it so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people will read that and still get the same emotional effect that you were hoping that they would receive from it.
So we, both Sarah and I and many people across the United States, especially in libraries, we want, we connect with and we support authors of all kind. So the question with this time, with this new energy toward equity, if you could see into a ball or make things happen, how can we make things better in the writing world? What gains can we make if we do things together? Where can we go together to make it a much more equitable writing world and reading world?
I think events like this are a great start. Having honest dialogues. I know we've had conversations in the past. This situation, I shouldn't even call it a situation, the murdering of George Floyd by these police officers is not the first time that this has happened. Black bodies have been getting policed in this country since 1619. But a lot of times things would happen and a Black person might feel, anxiety, fear, anger, frustration, sadness, melancholy, and they would go to work around their white coworkers and mask all of that. And we're all watching the same news. We all know about Trayvon Martin. And first thing that a white person at your job says is, well, he was asking for it. Or, this whole treating the victim like they're some type of a criminal. And you just never felt any sympathy. Like, these people just don't care. And then this happened with George Floyd. It was almost like it was the straw, the cliche straw that broke the camel's back. And there was no more hiding behind rhetoric. You had this man lying face down, calling for his deceased mother. And enough is enough. And it's not just in this country or in, Minnesota. It's 100 countries out there protesting. People still protesting. Black people have been catching it from everywhere. And this is just the time where people have just started saying, you know what, I'm going to be open and honest about this. And the difference now is that it seems like white people and non-Black people want to understand how to make the world better. I don't think that people just consciously sit back saying, I'm going to go and sabotage somebody else. But when you benefit from a system that is designed to sabotage people and you don't say anything about it, then you're kind of indirectly doing that. So seeing people actively wanting to know, how can I help? What can I do? And there, it depends on what it is in the industry, like as far as publishers. Clearly, you need more Black editors. You need more Black people who are in the corporate office. Well, we don't really know who they are. That's a question that people offer right now for, I don't really know what Black readers to read. And then when someone says, well, read Toni Morrison, you're like, okay, I'm good then. I read Toni Morrison. I don't have to read any other Black people. That doesn't even make sense. Do the work. That's all I can really say about that. Do the work. Come at people honestly and, ask, like, what can we do to make this thing better? The Boy Scouts of America, they recently decided to make some changes to their program. They added a merit badge for diversity and inclusion and made the merit badge required for all Eagle Scouts. So that's a group that's listening, trying to find a way to make it better. And I know that it's not going to be perfect in my lifetime. It probably won't be perfect in my daughter's lifetime, but we have to make it a little bit better each time. And if people are actually paying attention and actively wanting to make it better, that I think that I have to personally be an optimistic person and help support the measures that improve the world around us. So, and I think a lot of people are like that. In fact, most people that I know are, you know, Black people are not trying to burn anything down, contrary to what Terry Crews might think in his wild dreams. Black people just want a fair shot, not retribution, a fair shot. And what does that mean? That means that we shouldn't be the only ones in prison. You know, we should make up 80% of the prison population when we're 14% of the country. It just doesn't make any sense. And if you treated people fairly, things would automatically look differently. I mean, in my town, when I was practicing law, it was not uncommon for a white person to commit the exact same crime as a Black person and then get a much lighter sentence, if a sentence at all. Or they hit you with the bail and you're like, well, because you can't afford the bail, you're stuck in jail. And these are all things that systemically oppress a particular group of people. We just need to all say, you know what? This is not right. Let me give you another example. And some of it's not conscious racism. It's just people being obtuse without realizing that they are. And, you know, that happens more often than you would think. A Black woman should not have to have a string of degrees and certifications just to be considered for a job, whereas a white man merely has potential. And it's really that simple. Do the right thing. You know what the right thing is. If you do the right thing for the right reason, you should have positive results in the end. But if you keep playing these games, all you're doing is creating a system that perpetuates itself, and then you have the next explosion of anger and frustration. And we don't need that. We really don't. We should be past that at this point.
Well, thank you for that bit of candidness. And I'm sure Sarah and I mean, that was part of a lot of the reason that we wanted to do this was to have someone like you that's involved in our project, a national award winner, that, you know, these are the conversations that we need to be having more and more. So I'm going to, before we move into questions, again, I'm going to end my questioning on a lighter note and ask you about your, I believe your book that just got released. It's Can I Kick It?
Can I kick it?
Can
Yes.
I Kick It?
Yes.
Could you, can you tell me a little bit about this book that's about sneakers?
Yes. Okay. So I've always wanted to do a book about sneakers. I'm a sneakerhead, and I never could figure out how to do one. And I've written several stories about sneakers, and I talked to Mitchell Davis over at Bibliolabs about this, and he was like, "Yeah, we could see that being something that people want to, you know, to read." So I found someone who was just as well. He's very prolific. He's a poet. His name is Van G. Garrett. He's based out of Houston, Texas. And we had some conversations, and he even told me that he had done a sneaker essentials course from Fashion Institute of Technology. And he's a big sneakerhead. I'm like, man, we got to get together. I'll write half the book. You write the other half. I do microfiction, you do poetry. And I think I was willing myself to write the stories because I knew that he was writing. But the story is very fun. It's 80 different stories and poems in the collection. Covers everything from, you know, people's obsession with the Yeezy sneakers to people's love of the Jordan 1 to just reminiscing on growing up and how sneakers have always been a part of that. If you're a person who likes sneakers even mildly, then you're going to like the collection. It's really a lot of fun. And if you're a person who just can't see how people can get excited about sneakers, then I would still say to check the book out because, you know, you might actually get a different perspective. I'm not saying that everybody has to be a sneakerhead. Right now, you should probably be saving your money for other things, but it's still fun. And I think the book reflects that energy and that funness of collecting sneakers.
And it's got a great cover as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you so very much. And we're going to get into questions. And I'm sure, Sarah, before you want to jump into the questions, do you want to tell everyone how, especially if they have the Biblioboard app and they're in a Biblioboard state, how they can read many of Rand's books. And Rand, thank you so much. I truly enjoyed this, and I truly enjoyed all of our time together getting ready for this. And let's move you over and start so that Sarah can help with the questions. So again, I truly enjoyed this today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Denise. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I will just jump in and say, if you are a if your library is a BiblioBoard customer, or if you are in a state that is a BiblioBoard customer, you can download the BiblioBoard library app and access it there. Otherwise, many states are geo-authenticated for BiblioBoard. Just check out your library and access BiblioBoard library through them. I have a question about how you talked about how the default is white, and just sort of digging into that of how authors should address the race of all of their characters. Specifically, how should white authors approach writing characters of color, and digging into sometimes their intent of how they're representing characters of color versus the impact.
Wow. Okay, so let's just say we own a football team, and we have all kind of mythology of how we came up with the name for the team. But if you take the name of that team and you put it in the dictionary, look at the dictionary, and it says offensive term, racial slur, that's telling you about impact. But you're like, well, I didn't really name it to diss a population of people. I named it because we had a coach who had a nickname and blah, 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 whatever the story is. And then you go even farther and you dig in. That's where it gets good. You dig in. You say that you polled a community of people, and I don't think that any entire community has ever been polled. I've never been polled for anything. So, and then based on this anecdotal information you got from this limited poll, you use that as a way of digging in further and ignoring, because it's still good intentions. Then you're part of the problem. I mean, it shouldn't have taken George Floyd passing away for the Washington football team to change their nickname. Shouldn't have taken George Floyd passing away for the state of Mississippi to finally take the Confederate flag off of the state flag. I can go on a list of the changes that have happened as a result. But for writers who actually want to be a part of the solution, what I would say with regard to writing people who are outside of your ethnic group or your culture is try your best, one, to understand that no single group is homogenous or monolithic. There are 100 million different ways of being Black. And when you lock in on a particular type of thing and say that this is Blackness right here, then you've already started to set yourself up. Let me give you an example. Like in writing groups where there are not many Black people in the writing group, a Black writer might write something and then be critiqued by a white person in the group saying that, I don't know, it just doesn't feel Black to me. It's not Black enough. Or what the hell does that mean? And you're hearing this from the outside. It's like, well, Black people automatically speak using a vernacular of zero copula, which means the absence of a verb, or double negatives, or this, that, and the other. And if that's the case, then I'm not being true to the character is authentically Black if I'm not imitating this particular vernacular. You got to be careful there. You got to be careful there. Be respectful. I would really start from the default that everybody's human and have them speak the way that most people speak. Because there's high, middle, and low diction. There's, oh, I'm stricken by your pulchritudinous aura, which is high diction. Oh, you're very beautiful, middle diction. Oh, you fine as all get out. That's low diction. And there's no need because, oh, they're Black, they have to speak the low diction. And just give the middle diction to everybody. If you describe the cultural context, people automatically hear the voices in their head the way they should be written. You shouldn't have to go and clip and do all kinds of things. And, well, Zora Neale Hurston did it. This person did it. Even you did it, Rand Walker. And I'm like, yeah, I did it. That's my culture. It's different. Like I wouldn't go up on somebody who is from the LGBTQIA plus culture and say, yes, that's not my place. And it's stereotypical. And if it hurts one person, then you should consider that. You shouldn't try to dig in and say, you know what? I talked to my one Black friend, or I talked to my one gay friend, and they were cool with this, so it's good. That's a Daniel Snyder. And we learned that just does not work. You know, if you're having problems, you don't know anybody, there's sensitivity readers out there you can reach out to. But the main thing I would say is look for the humanity in the person first. And then if you can incorporate other aspects of the culture respectfully, people will get it. I mean, I know people of all backgrounds. If you're talking about something from a particular culture, I'm like, okay, what I know about that, I can insert that. You don't have to put that on the page for me. If anything, I need to see my commonality with that person, not bridge the gulf between me and that character. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned earlier that in one of the first line of one of the characters of Race of Races, Black readers would know right away that the character was Black. Can you just share that line? Do you know that line off the top of your head?
I don't have the book in front of me, but I know I was describing her hair and her complexion. And there's certain things that would jump out to a Black reader, especially about hair. But yeah, just little things like that. And then plus, if you realize this is in Mississippi. So although there are a variety of different races in Mississippi, largely people think of Mississippi, and I'm a Mississippian by birth, is a black and white kind of place, both metaphorically and literally. And everything is kind of fed to you through that prism. And yeah, it never really even occurred to me until Denise mentioned it, that a person could go a number of pages without actually getting that information. But I'm glad that, I hope you don't feel like I tried to hide the bone from you or whatever, but I brought up the race part of it because it actually impacted the story. As this guy had married, and this is something about this character, he was a white millionaire lawyer, and he married into wealth, which is something that also happens a lot around here. And he had a daughter who they were pulling from the public school because it was alleged that she had a relationship with a person who was not white, and placed her in a private school of predominantly white students. And, that is a reality in my hometown. So I just kind of wrote it that way. In fact, I dedicated the book. At the very beginning of that book, it says dedicated to GC. I didn't ever mention his name there, but he was the purpose behind the book. He was a Black man, a Black kid who was lynched in my hometown for the very thing that's discussed in the book. And this was not in the 50s. This was in the 80s.
Wow. Man, I don't know how to move on from that. Thank you. The next question, have your colleagues made more of an effort to talk about race and your experiences with you personally since the death of George Floyd?
Well, my colleagues at the university, we haven't really talked about it because we don't really talk over the summer. We'll be talking coming back, but we all know each other's hearts. So I know that the way I took it, they took it the same way. I work at a historically Black university, Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. So it's not really a question of how my colleagues feel, more like the writing colleagues I have. And this is where it has been important. Like Denise, when you came up, Denise, you told me you talked with Sarah, you guys want to do this. I immediately wanted to be a part of it because you were showing that you cared, and you didn't just care, you want to actually do something, set something in motion. Let's create some type of a action plan here. And the same thing with Bibliolabs. I had a great talk with Mitchell Davis and just people reaching out. And I recently joined a writing group, the James River Writers, based out of Richmond. And they just reached out and just, how can we be there for you? And, I've done a lot of work with a lot of different groups over the past year. And when people show that they care about you on a personal level, when they don't have to, they've gotten what they were going to get from you, but no, it's not like that. They demonstrated that this is not something that's temporary. We're really want to be a part of your life going forward. And that's been the thing that's meant the most to me about all of this. So those colleagues outside of the university, those are the ones that have really stepped up. I can't say, well, I hesitate to use the word surprise, but they caught me off guard and it warmed my heart. And I think that's the thing that that's been so wonderful about this experience as of late.
All right, well, thank you. Yeah, we do care about you personally, and we are very appreciative of you taking on the burden of sharing your story with us and being part of our growth and continued learning about how we can show that we care and take action too. So we appreciate that a lot. We don't have any other questions, so I guess I will throw it out to you and say, is there anything else we didn't cover today that you want to share with us that you think it's important for us to touch on?
Let's just keep the dialogue going. That's look for opportunities to help people, and not look past them, not ignore their pain, but find a way to use that empathy, especially that readers and writers and librarians have, and just keep doing what you're doing, and eventually the world will. And the change is going to happen to the point where we had the jolt, recently, but these changes should hopefully continue to happen on such a gradual level that one day you just look up and it just like, how do we get here? And that's a nice thing to have happen.
Yeah, well, I hope that's true for sure. I hope that is true. Denise, any last comments or words from you?
My only comment would be, I think we want to thank Rand for sharing this, and again, for him being our first national winner. The pride that I have in being part of this program today is really heartfelt, and I thank you very much, Rand, for being part of us. And we all need to step forward together and stuff, and this is the type of things that we need to do, but it takes someone with your kind of courage to do this with us, and I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate that. Thank you both, Denise and Sarah.
No,
and also I'd like to thank Jeffrey, because as I mentioned before, sometimes people hack these things, and this could have been an ugly display of the very thing that I was talking about earlier, but it didn't happen. And Jeffrey, I do appreciate you for helping to make sure that everything was secure throughout this discussion.
All right.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm sure you're going to say that, Sarah.
Yes, I was just going to say that, and to check out indieauthorproject.com as well if you're an indie author, to see how you can get involved with this community in your state. Cool. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
All right.